Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Purposeful Powerhouse podcast. I have a very special guest with me today, Holly McNeill, and I are going to be talking about the lost formula to happiness, how your happiness may actually be hidden right in plain sight. So I cannot wait to explore this further. Hi, Holly. Great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Megan. I'm excited to be here today.
Hooray! Yay, yay, yay. Okay, so everyone can read about your amazing self in the bio, in the show notes. So let's get down to some business, shall we? Let's talk about you. We would love to just jump right in and get to know you a little bit better. And that we can do by hearing part of your story. So, can you take us to a moment in your life, maybe when things changed for you, or you had a aha, or realization? Or maybe you were feeling rather unhappy where you started to discover some of the tools that you're going to be sharing about today.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I tell people, for the longest time, I was totally stuck and asleep and unaware of what was going on. And as a child, I learned I was unlovable and unworthy. So I created this perfect world to cover that up. I had everything: beautiful house, handsome husband, two lovely children, fabulous career. But the foundations of that life was flawed. And at age 34, it all imploded. Sitting sobbing on the toilet in the middle of the night, I had made some poor choices and I was just really scared. It was really the lowest point of my unhappy, self absorbed, and anxiety filled life. And so I made a vow that night, just, literally at the lowest point. Life, God, Buddha, anyone out there listening, give me another chance and I'll do better. Help me and I will change. So I was given that second chance, and that was that moment was right before. Actually, it was right after 9/11, so a very low time for everyone. But with my karmic debt in tow, I went out to make good on that vow, which wouldn't be easy because as I've learned, sometimes things get harder before they get easier. It would catapult me out of a mutually manipulative and controlling marriage into an 8-year battle for my children. It would take everything I had to prevent my alienation from them. It would take me from my hometown in the Black Hills of South Dakota to Minneapolis and beyond. I read books, teachings, lectures, anything spiritual I could find. And I didn't know where I was going. I just knew there was better. I studied, and then in the greater New York City area, I studied Buddhism for 5 years before at age 49, packing up everything I had, leaving everyone I knew to move across the country and live in a Dharma house in San Francisco. In my early 40s, I put two intentions out to the world. The first was to have the time and space to write about what I thought I knew at the time. And the second was, that was the second one. The first one was to retire from my chosen profession as an architect before I turned 50. And as it turned out, I retired 2 days before I turned 50. And in 2017, I sat down to write. But it wouldn't be until the COVID pandemic, when we were all sequestered in our homes, that I printed out a book proposal. And looking at the pages, it was like the lights came on. Right, this set of mindfulness and meditation practices that had been forming, with realization ever since the 9/11 kind of incident on the toilet. I've had realization after realization after realization, and that moment, looking at those pages, P.E.R.L.O.V.E was born. The lost formula to happiness kind of came out of the pages, and so now I am trying to. My biggest goal in life is that these practices outlive me, so that people maybe who are or was as stuck as I don't have to search 20 years across the country and come coast to coast. So that's my story. That's why I'm here today.
Wow, thank you. There's so much in there, and I really honor the journey that you went on, and I can definitely relate in some ways, as I know many of our listeners will be as well able to. That sort of story of the dark night of the soul when everything falls apart and we're in the shambles of it and wondering, like, what am I actually doing? What am I supposed to do? What am I here for? All the questions, the sort of existential questions that many of us get to. And so I love that it took you on a journey, but it has given you so much awareness and given you so much tools that you know are so useful that you're sharing with us today. That is your passion and purpose to be able to share and hopefully expedite that process for other people, or maybe help them skip it
Yeah,
altogether.
I mean, yeah, it seems like most people have to hit rock bottom before, but
I
if
know.
you can find this formula within us, and that's my goal, and that's my purpose, and we'll see how far I get, right?
Right. I know. We can preach the prevention as much as we want, as loud as we can, but yeah, no. Sometimes you got to get there yourself to really appreciate what life is all about and the possibilities.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to hear things, which is something I talk about in my practices. If it's something not familiar to you, it's hard for you to even hear it, to take it in. So
Mm. Hmm. That's interesting, right? Because it is, maybe we have filters or programs or paradigms that are sort of screening that for us, or maybe there's parts of our personality that are really resisting that because it would expedite and initiate our growth. So that's interesting. So maybe that can be our jumping off point of when we have those things that are popping up for us, and when we feel inner resistance, or we hear maybe the little insidious voices in our head that are like, no, don't do that, that's what's that, or like, you can't do that, or all of that nonsense of the inner dialogue, which we lovingly call the chatter of the negative shitty committee or the saboteurs in our head. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about that inner resistance that might be popping up for us, either on a big scale or when we're presented with a new tool or listening to a new podcast.
right, and it's absolutely, one of the amazing things about this journey is that, like, I'm an architect, and I'm used to putting drawings together. It's like putting a huge puzzle together. And like when some of the final pieces fell in, it was just like, wow. So each of us have between 6,000 and 70,000 thoughts a day. 80% of those are negative and 95% repeat. And though most of our negative self-talk is destructive and unhelpful, we tend to accept it as truth, and with it create our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Joe Dispenza in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know in 2004, I don't know if you saw that movie, he says that nerve cells that fire together wire together. So the more often we think these negative thoughts, right, the more solid and real, anything we think of consciously or unconsciously, but consistently, becomes very solid and it's very real. And it even then the chemicals from our head then go into our body and fills up our cells. And so everything in our body is screaming whatever we've been repeating to ourselves. And so when we come across something new, a new idea, a new podcast, it's like it doesn't compute, right? If we're not familiar with it, we can't see it. And so we reject it. Our mind is a computer that's really a biocomputer set to protect its programming, right? That's why I call it the happiness thief, our thoughts, emotions, and feelings. Because the happiness thief whispers to us every day to protect this negative TEF, thoughts, emotions, and feelings, at all costs. And that's where you get that resistance. That's where people will stop. People drop things before they even start them. And that's really the goal of programming and conditioning. So if we can learn to change our conditioning, then the opposite would be true, right? The goal would be to find happiness and to expand and all of those other things. And we have the power to do that, for sure.
I love that. And it's so interesting to think about, because our brain is, hardwired for our survival and our protection. And I've learned, thankfully, and I think hopefully people are going to take this away from what you're sharing right now in this conversation, is that sometimes when we have that inner resistance come up, it's a really important opportunity for us to not only take a step back and listen to the dialogue that's happening, check in with our feelings, but maybe even lean in a little bit and
Yeah.
get curious, because it's like, oh, hey, what are you doing? Are you trying to stop me from stretching myself again? Thanks, but we're good.
You skipped almost all the way to the end of the formula, which is vest,
Oh.
right? When you open your heart, you vest in what you find there, but you should also take ownership of the obstacles that show up in your life. Because while your thoughts, emotions, feelings, while the happiness thief, while the shitty committee is trying to keep you scared and isolated, your true nature, your omnipresent, all-pervasive mind is showing you in every person, place, or thing, every event, all the crap that shows up, what you need to set yourself free. Absolutely every time. I went to a retreat in the Berkshires of Massachusetts in Kripalu called Leaning into Adversity. It's exactly what you're talking about, because if you lean into, and also when you talk about creating space between, if you can create space between you and your thoughts, emotions, and feelings, I ask people to consider the idea that we're actually separate from our thoughts, emotions, and feelings. You can look at them with wisdom, right? And you can respond to them with wisdom. Well, if you're stuck on the thoughts, emotions, and feelings highway with all the horns honking and yelling, right? You can't even see where you're going, right? You're just in it and it's driving you crazy. And to you, that is reality. So.
I love that. That's a beautiful analogy. And there's just so much chaos. And that's so, it's so interesting that there's so many of these ancient wisdom traditions, Buddhism, mindfulness, yoga, and they have been speaking to this for thousands of years. And the nature of the mind hasn't really changed very much at all. And we're living in this modern, inundated, very overwhelming, potentially very nonstop culture, depending on where you are in the world, and social media. Like if you do any social media interaction, you see how quickly you can get bored. And if you do any content creation, you know that you have to catch people in the first 3 seconds.
Yeah.
It's like these ancient wisdom traditions that are teaching us so much about the core of who we are, that they knew about it thousands of years ago, and it's incredibly applicable today. And so I love that you have really boiled it down. So let's talk more about your framework that you uncovered. Let's start with at the beginning, P. And maybe just kind of explain it out for people, because it's so clear and it's so powerful.
So the formula is in 2 parts.
Okay.
Pledge, evaluate, recognize, where we first train the mind. Locate, open, vest, and expand, where we then train or open the heart. Right? So first we pledge to pay attention to our mind. Right? When we're not aware, we're automatically responding to this negative TEF, reinforcing it, and creating our worlds with it. So we pledge 1 minute 6 times a day, just to stop, take a deep breath, and just to watch. We're not pushing them away. We're not trying to change them. We're just paying attention. Because if we do that long enough, 1 minute 6 times a day, the goal eventually is for it to be a 24/7 habit, so that you're constantly aware, right? We're pledging to create awareness, right? And the good news is, if you do anything long enough, it becomes part of your autonomic response and it becomes habit. So if you do this 1 minute 6 times a day, for long enough, so it's 21 days to make a habit, then you will start to become aware of what's going on. Okay. And then we go to the first E, which is evaluate. There's a wonderful poem by Robert Blythe, who's a late poet and activist, on a CD by John Kabat-Zinn that a wonderful therapist had given to me 10 years into my journey. And even before my Buddhist study, I knew that there's one thing that I tell people that's so important, is that if you want to learn something, if you want to change something, you must do it over and over and over and over and over again. So I listened to this CD over and over and over and over and over again. And then I memorized it, and then I transcribed it, and then I lost it. But that's a different story. We don't have time for it. Anyway, so part of this, he talks about the long black bag poem. By the long black bag we drag behind us. So when we're young, and people don't like things about us, we take parts of ourselves and we stuff them in this bag. Good girls don't do that. Good boys don't behave that way. And as we age, we continue to stuff pieces of ourselves that we think aren't acceptable, or we don't want to look at ourselves, into this bag. And eventually we forget what's in there ourselves, yet we're acting from them every day. So in E, we evaluate what we've stuffed in the bag, right? Paying attention to what those patterns are. And this is the hardest part. Most people, John Kabat-Zinn says that none of us get away, without having some kind of major trauma or grief in our lives. So that's usually deepest in the bag. So I tell people to go into it with honesty, but also with kindness. So we're finding targets. We're looking for targets for change, right? In E, in evaluate. And then in recognize, right, it's A plus B equals C, P plus E equals R, pledge to what you've watched. You have a habit of watching your mind. You know what these targets are, and then you recognize them as they come up in your daily life. Right.
Oh, I love that. And I hadn't heard of that poem before, but it's so perfect. And one of my brothers said at one point, we all choose our own bag. And that's what kept popping into my head. And we all choose what we put in the bag, and it's so interesting. I'll have to look that up because I think that's really quite potent. And I'd love to maybe go a little bit deeper into something you said there of we've stuffed it in the bag, but yet we're living from that.
Right.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so what happens is when we become uber familiar with something, so there's being unfamiliar with something. If you're unfamiliar with something, like the story of Columbus's ships, when Columbus first arrived to America, the native people had never seen the ships before, so they couldn't see them on the horizon, right? So you can't see what your brain doesn't have a pattern for. But on the flip side of that, you can be uber familiar with something. If we've had 6,000 to 70,000 negative thoughts a day, 80% are negative for 30 years. I mean, that's like millions and millions of thoughts. And any TEF, any thoughts, emotions, or feelings that you're grossly familiar with will become habit and part of your autonomic response when you're not paying attention, okay? So you've stuffed these things in the bag, they've become habit, and then you're living from them every day, even though you don't know what's in there, right? Because it's just, we become so familiar with it that it's become habit. Once something becomes habit, if you don't change that habit, you will reinforce it, right? So yeah, you can be, and a lot of times we know intellectually what we're doing, but for example, at the bottom of my bag is worthlessness and unlovability, covered by anxiety, control, fear. Well, fear is at the bottom of the bag, but anxiety was at the top, right? And so I knew I was an anxious person, and intellectually we know what our lives have been like. But if you're not paying attention to what those thoughts are, you react to them every day. So when something comes up that's bothering you, that makes your mind, that brings your mind unrest, that's coming from your bag, right? Because the true nature of your mind is peaceful and calm and wise. So anything that causes your mind unrest is coming from your bag and can be changed. So.
That's wonderful news. It gives so much clarity and understanding, of like what we've resisted and we've stuffed away, yet it's still running the show.
Right.
Yet we can, once we bring this loving, compassionate awareness to it, then begin to shift it. And so I love that. So that's the beginning of it, right? And it is, again, to go back to, all of these ancient practices that so astutely begin with awareness.
Right.
It's really becoming that witnessing presence, which is our true essence, but to be able to take a little step back and be cognizant of the dialogue that's happening, or the thoughts, the emotions, the feelings that are going on, that many people don't give the space to recognize, right? Because we're so in the program of, what are you talking about? This is who I am. This is how my mind is all the time. Blah, 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 blah. Whereas when you start to practice some of what you're sharing, and in the yoga practice or whatever practice or martial arts or whatever it is for you, that gives you that experience of stillness, to be able to connect back to your true essence, that's potency. So being able to speak to that from that point. So now we've begun the journey of the framework. So we're starting to dive into it a little bit. So then what are the next steps?
Well, one more thing I want to say before we leave the PER is that at first you're going to meet with resistance. Okay, you're absolutely going to meet with resistance. The happiness thief is not going down without a fight. So I have this secret weapon, right? And it is this: acting in ways contrary to your patterns aids in bringing the happiness thief out of hiding. Aids in bringing the crappy committee, to light. Right? When we start to acting with compassion or affirmations, that's not hardwired in our brains, right? It's like does not compute, right? And so it starts to break up nerve cells that no longer fire together, no longer wire together. So it starts to break up those patterns. So there's a moment of clarity and those aha moments to come through. The true nature of your mind then can come through. So even if you are stuck and you think this is how life is, and you have you can't see a way out at all, right? Just practice something for 21 days. Pick up an affirmation, practice compassion, and just do it consistently. And I guarantee there'll be a slight change, a glimpse, and glimpses are to be celebrated, because it means new pathways are being formed. Right.
Oh, I love that. And that really is, it's bringing light to things, you know, and so that we can shed a little bit of awareness on it and bring it to the surface. So I love that it kind of agitates things a little bit. So there's also a recipe in there too of like, okay, what are we looking to change? How can we switch things up a little bit? And then we start to really, they kind of flare up and they get into their
Yeah.
habits. And then they kind of shift gears a little bit sometimes, right? That's the interesting thing about these self-protective mechanisms, that they're like, oh, they got on to me with that one. Let's take another back door and see if we can trip them up over that way.
When you're aware of it and when you're looking at it, you can see the mind throw up roadblocks. If you're making a change, something almost immediately will show up in your life to deter you from that. And so when the more awareness you gain of what's going on, the more the direct way, pledge plus evaluate equals recognize works, right? And that's when it really starts to unravel this big kind of knot that has been your patterns. But in the meantime, this indirect way, this acting in ways contrary, kind of loosens it up a little bit and creates that space. But so then we get to love, which is my favorite part of the formula. And I'm doing, actually, I don't know when this is going to air, but I'm doing a show at the Hollywood Fringe Festival this June.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. My niece and I are doing it, again, trying to get these practices out to the world. And at the end, she goes, oh crap, we're at the end, we haven't gotten to love yet. And I say, you know what, not to worry, P.E.R.L.O.V.E is the hard part. I say, in love, we celebrate glimpses. In love, we use objects of meditation. In love, we use our power of imagination, but more than anything else, we sit back, relax, and explore what remains when the teff is removed. Right? We locate that space as an object of meditation, right? And we might notice that it's expandable. It's our first indication that we might be more than this body and mind, right? We know it because it's authentic peace. Then when we drop into our hearts, we drop into our hearts for two reasons with that space, because first of all, a lot of ancient teachings say that the root mind is not in the head, but it's in the heart. And when you open your heart, there's this amazing flow of energy there. Right? And so there's no surprise, the O in P.E.R.L.O.V.E is open. And you use your power of imagination. There's a YouTube video by Genla Dekian from the Buddhist tradition I studied that says people don't realize that what we imagine becomes real, but it does. So we use our power of imagination to imagine our hearts opening past the confines of our chest. And at some point, you're going to get a glimpse of this flow, like a light bulb that comes on when it gets enough electricity, or a waterfall overflows. And you will have physical sensations of this flow. And at first, it'll be a glimpse because most of the thoughts, emotions, and feelings will come back in and shut the door. So vest then is to take ownership of that flow, spend energy there, spend time there. There's so much it can teach you about yourself, about your true nature, about who you really are. Eckhart Tolle says the moment we realize we're not the voice in our heads, we're the one that hears it, a whole realm of intelligence opens up. There's a vast realm of intelligence beyond thought. But vest, as I said, then also means take responsibility for the obstacles that show up in your life, because it is then showing you what you need to set yourself free. And then we finally get to expand the last E. So the formula to happiness starts with an intention. It ends when you can live permanently in an open heart with a whole lot of mindfulness and meditation in between. It's not hard. It just takes time and attention. But in the end, finding happiness might be a little bit different than what you expect when a slight shift in perspective occurs, when you realize that you and the world around you are one and the same. Right? And I did a 2-year book study on what enlightenment itself is. And it actually is a bit of a mystery. What to expect in enlightenment is a bit of a mystery, because it's said to be beyond words. But I can tell you that the more you recognize your teff, the more you open your heart, the more you live in this flow, the less attached you are to the fruition of this world. And the more clarity you have. And I love this beautiful saying by Tim Olmsted, who said, you realize that the entire path is not about perfecting ourselves. It's simply about becoming familiar with what is already there. And when you stop seeking, you have arrived. So
Oh, I'm like, I don't even know how to respond. I
Yeah.
literally have full body chicken skin goosebumps right now. I feel like my heart is like, yes. And that's the essence of the understanding and the connection. And I love, and there was so much beautifulness in there, but the fact that it's beyond words and it's really is a visceral experience. And
Mhm.
it's that's what we're seeking, right? That's why we do these practices. And it is that inner connection, that inner like knowing and witnessing that feels so right to me and that you're sharing there. And to be able to connect on that level and not to have to conceptually be able to explain it, but just know it on the heart level. And that's what is so beautiful about everything that you're sharing. And I really am so grateful that you were able to consolidate this in a way that helps people to understand and to become more present to the dialogue that's happening that might be stealing your joy, but really being able to use these tools in a way that helps us to truly open to our full possibility, right? And we hear that of keep your heart open, open yourself up to it, and that's really what you're speaking to here is first and foremost anchoring into the truth of who we are, and then from that place, and of course the Buddhists love and many people do the analogy of the lotus and that expansion, and knowing that your journey was muddy and difficult, and everyone's is to some degree to varying depths of that, right?
Right.
But coming back to that space of connection, coming back to this essence of who you truly are, and from that anchor becoming even more authentically expressed as you expand. So there's so much brilliance in that. And thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome. And you're absolutely right. With all the teachings over all over the country and from coast to coast, most from ancient teachings to modern teachings, they all point back to these few simple truths, right? We are not thoughts, emotions, and feelings. We're so much more than that. So I do a deeper dive class, a forum class, and this series is called Simple and Obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because through all of it, at the end, it's really kind of this straightforward path. It's just our own patterns and teff where we don't think, we can't see that this is available to us, and this is doable, and it doesn't take forever, and it doesn't, you don't have to disrupt your life for it. You can do it starting with 1 minute 6 times a day, and it's possible. It's not. For all of those who thinks it's impossible, it is not impossible. I mean, I did it. I was so lost. I was so stuck. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but it's there. When you put the intention out to find it and you stay open to that intention, you will find your way. You will find the lost formula to happiness lost within yourself.
I love that. And so I know that you have a gift for everybody, and I know that likely through that gift, they'll be able to connect with you and learn more about the class that you were just sharing. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that beautiful gift that you have for everyone?
So, like I said, it was right at the end of the COVID pandemic when these practices came about. And I've created a class, a free online class recording of all of this. It's a step-by-step through the whole thing. You sign up for my newsletter. I send out a newsletter once a month, and it'll highlight one of the practices and give some insights and tell you what I'm doing with the practices. But when you sign up in the welcome email, there'll be a link to this class. It's only available through this link. It's an hour and 6 minutes long, but we go through each one of the practices, all the teachers and teachings that I talked about today. And I suggest to anyone, again, that wants to change, if it speaks to you, listen to it over and over and over and over. It's free, it's available. And if you do that, right, like I listened to that CD over and over again, those things will start to register and to show up. So yes, that's what I have for everyone today.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, the repetition, that's so key, right? And that's one of the
Absolutely.
keys to shifting the inner dialogue and rewiring our neural system. And so thank you for that beautiful gift. And as we close up today, will you let us know from your perspective what it means to be a purposeful powerhouse?
For me, because I came from being so stuck, it just means that this life and this journey is actually such a blessing, right? And the powerhouse in me just wants to share that with everyone, that heaven or hell is right here. And if our powerhouse is our mind, and we can train it, as however we want to create whatever we want. And so here's to the happiness of everyone out there. And your powerhouse is right there waiting for you. So
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for that blessing as well. And so thank you everybody for being part of this beautiful community and for listening or watching today. And so please, please make sure to take a screenshot and share your takeaways. Make sure to grab Holly's lovely gift as well so that you can dive into this formula and really live from that place of your pure essence and your joy and that heart space connection that is your vibrant place. And so lovely, lovely, lovely. Thank you again, Holly. It was really fun to chat with you today.
yes, thank you, Megan. I really enjoyed being here.
Wonderful. Okay, everybody. Well, until next time, continue to come back into that beautiful heart of yours because it has a vibrancy and a magic that our world so beautifully needs and is so honoring in your expression, your unique expression, right? Living from that place of pure potentiality and limitlessness. So, to that note, thank you so much for living on purpose every day and being part of this beautiful movement to elevate the energy of the planet. So, thank you so much. Take good care, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.